Good afternoon, everyone. This is Adam Carlson once again, minister for the Midwest Church of Christ here in Ferguson, Missouri. Today is June 21st, 2020. We know today as Father's Day, so happy Father's Day to any and all fathers or grandfathers that may be watching and viewing this. I apologize for the lateness of getting this out. I had attempted to record this morning during our worship assembly, but my video capability didn't work for some reason, so I do apologize for the delay, but I am still here giving you this lesson here today. So this lesson that we're going to study for the next few minutes is entitled, Fathers Are Essential. We hear a lot, especially we've heard a lot over the last 2 or 3 months about quote-unquote essential and non-essential. Well, what does that mean? Well, we can discuss that, but looking at it biblically speaking and looking at the family unit as God designed it, fathers are essential. In the family unit, in that structure, the way God designed it, there is none who are non-essential. And so I want to begin, first of all, by looking at some statistics. Normally, I don't do this, but I thought for this occasion that it would be a little bit more appropriate. Currently, throughout the United States, there are approximately 19 million children that are living without a father. Now, the circumstances for that may vary, and I won't try to surmise as to why that is. Some of it is willful absence. Some of it may be circumstances that are beyond anyone's control. But 19 million children without a father. So let us think about some things about when fathers are present versus when fathers are absent. When the father is present and active in a child's life, children are on average less likely to drop out of school, go to prison, face mistreatment through neglect, harassment, bullying, etc. And they are at a lower risk for engaging in sexual promiscuity. Boys typically have fewer behavioral problems. Girls typically have fewer psychological issues when the father is present. When the father is absent during pregnancy, if the father is not present during the pregnancy of the child, or during the mother's pregnancy rather, the miscarriage rate, the chance of a miscarriage, is 48%. When the father is present, it goes down to 22%. In the first 28 days after the birth of a child, when the father is absent, the mortality rate is 4 times higher. And children without a father are about 47% more likely to end up in poverty. Now, these statistics, I did not make these up. You can find this online. You can go to fatherhood.org. That is the website of the National Fatherhood Initiative. You can find those statistics there, coupled with data from the Census Bureau, and I will post a link to that data there in the video description. So now with that in mind, let us think about, spiritually speaking, how critical and how important the father is. Let us consider, first of all, the father is essential for leading his family. And again, we're talking spiritually primarily. The father is essential and necessary for leading his family to safety. And we find one such example in the Scriptures in Genesis chapter 7 and verse 7. We find Noah doing that very thing. There we're told, so Noah with his sons, his wife, his sons' wives, went into the ark because of the waters of the flood. For the 120 years prior to this, Noah had been building this ark, preparing for this time, but he would have also been preaching and proclaiming God's word in some manner. But the only ones that took heed to it were those of his own household. So, my friends, the family unit is critical in the spiritual lives and development of children. Fathers are necessary for leading their family in dedication. Joshua chapter 24 and verse 15, a passage that I'm sure that many of us are familiar with. Joshua makes that statement, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And that's a common saying, and we might even see it on plaques in people's homes hanging on a wall in a prominent place. And that's well and good. But if a household is going to make that affirmation, then they had better be prepared to live up to it. Fathers, especially, who are spiritually leading and guiding their family, barring insinuating circumstances such as sickness or, heaven forbid, death, as the case might be, there should be no question as to where that family will be and what they're doing on Sunday morning. They should be gathered with God's people, worshiping God. And then thirdly, fathers are necessary for leading by example. 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 1. Paul, in writing to the Corinthian church, he makes a statement to them. He tells them, "Be followers or imitators of me as I am of Christ." And while he's writing that to a church and not to a family per se, there's still some principle there that we would do well to adhere to. And since we're talking about fathers primarily, I'm going to speak to that side of it. Fathers, especially those who profess to be of Christian households, must let their family, especially their children, see Jesus Christ in his life. Set the example, set the tone. It is critical to our society. Secondly, fathers are essential for correction. There's instructive correction, such as what we find in Proverbs chapter 4 and verses 1 through 9. And there we find Solomon passing on some advice that was given to him by his father David. And it involves obtaining understanding and wisdom. But to do that, we must be willing to listen. A good father will instruct his children. But staying in the book of Proverbs, a couple of other passages that we'll look at here as well. And again, I'll include all of these references in the notes in the video description. So if there's anything you miss, worry not. I will make sure that you are able to get that. But Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 1. And here again, we find the words of King Solomon. And here is what he says: "A wise son heeds his father's instruction, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke." It's one thing to give instruction, but we who are hearers must be willing to receive that instruction. Children must be able and willing to listen to their fathers. A father that is doing what he is supposed to do. And again, I understand there are times and circumstances in which it may not be feasible for the father to be in the picture, such as in cases of neglect or abuse. That certainly would not be advisable, of course. But assuming that it is in a situation where it would be feasible, a good father, his children will listen to him. Why? Because they respect him. In Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 28, we find this: do not remove the ancient landmark which your fathers have set. Now, notice the plural fathers here rather than the singular father. In this sense, it's being used to refer to ancestors, or what we might call forefathers, that is, those of preceding generations. What is a landmark? Well, a landmark denotes something. It can be used to make claim to a property boundary. It can be a site, any number of things, but it is a marker of sorts. And here and in our society today, there is now, and there has been for quite some time, a push to do away with or to alter anything that is deemed traditional, or what some might say are out of date. And some progress and some change in some areas can be a good thing, but there are some things that are not to be altered with. And my friends, the standard that God has put before us, especially as it relates to the family, is not to be altered with, though many have tried and continue to try. The family unit has been under attack for a long time by the secularists, the humanists, and any number of others that you can think of. Satan is working overtime to try to undermine what God has put in order. We have no right to alter or to abolish what God has said that we must do. There are some things that cannot and should not be moved. Let's leave the ancient landmarks where they are. They're there for a reason. Secondly, a father provides corrective instruction. This can involve discipline. Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 24. Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 24. He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. Love, as I've said before, involves correction. If we love someone, we're going to correct them, and vice versa. They'll correct us if they love us as they ought. A good father will discipline his children as necessary. And lastly, he will do so in a proper manner. In the 6th chapter of the book of Ephesians, the Apostle Paul, in writing to the Ephesian church in verse 4, he gives instructions specifically to the fathers. He says, do not provoke them to wrath, but to bring them, that is the children, up in the nurture and admonition or admonishment of the Lord. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines that word that sometimes appear as admonition as gentle reproof. And so there is a right and there is a wrong way for discipline to take place. A good father will know the difference, but it is necessary. So much so that Paul repeats that same concept to the Colossian church in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 21. But also, fathers are essential for teaching their children. In Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verses 6 through 9, God, through Moses, instructs Israel to teach their children consistently, regularly, when you sit down, when you lie down, when you rise up, when you're walking and so forth, seize any and every opportunity to teach the children about God, His Word, and His will. Teaching is necessary or essential for posterity. In the book of Joshua, in chapter 4, and verses 5 through 24, after Israel has crossed over the Jordan River and entered into the land of Canaan and is beginning the conquest of the land, one of the first things, or if not the first thing, that they're instructed to do is 12 men, one of each tribe, representing the sons of Jacob, was to take a stone or a large rock, and they were to set it up at the spot in the Jordan River where they had crossed. And the purpose for that is explained in that text there in Joshua 4, so that when the succeeding generations saw it and asked what it meant, they could be told with all confidence that it was a reminder of what God had done for Israel. And likewise, in Psalm 78 and verses 1 through 8, we find some very powerful words there as well. Psalm 78 and verses 1 through 8. Let's turn there and let's notice what is said. Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, telling to the generation to come the praises of the Lord, and His strength and His wonderful works that He has done. For He established a testimony in Jacob, and appointed a law in Israel, which He commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, the children who would be born, that they may arise and declare them to their children, that they may set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments, and may not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not set its heart aright, and whose spirit was not faithful to God. So there we have two things. We have number one, instruction given for the current generation to teach the succeeding generation. And then the generation after that, and on we go. But not only were they to teach about God's law, but they were also to teach about what they had done wrong. And you can go through the scriptures, and especially the Old Testament, Exodus, and onward, and you will find many times that Israel fell short of God's expectation for them. The succeeding generations were to know of those things as well. It's important for a father to teach his children the whole counsel of God. And thirdly, fathers are essential in teaching for their children to know Jesus. In three different accounts, there are parallels of the same account. In Matthew chapter 19 and verses 13 through 15, in Mark chapter 10, verses 13 through 16, and Luke chapter 18, verses 15 through 17. You find there in those accounts children being brought to Jesus. And there we're told, of course, that the disciples rebuked them and tried to send them away. But what did Jesus say? Forbid them not. For unto such belong the kingdom of God. My friends, if more fathers would step up and do what they are supposed to do in instructing and in correcting and in teaching, so many of the problems that we face in our society probably would not exist Would it be absolutely perfect? Of course not. But we would see far less of what we've seen on our television screens the last few weeks. Fathers matter. And likewise, when it comes to the teaching, teaching is to begin in the home. Sunday school is a wonderful thing, and there are many dedicated and many wonderful Sunday school teachers out there, and I thank God for each and every one of them. But my friends, they only have those children 40 to 45 minutes a week. The rest of the time they should be in the care of mom and dad. What they receive on Sunday morning should be supplementary to what they receive at home. Sunday school should not be the primary source of teaching. It should be secondary. And we cannot expect children to know Jesus if they're not taught. For unto them belong the kingdom of God. And lastly, fathers are essential to help us understand our relationship with God. Throughout the scriptures, and especially in the Old Testament, and to some degree even in the New Testament, what you'll find is God's relationship with his people is depicted as that of a marriage and of that of a parent and a child. So what I want us to do is to think about this for just a few moments. I have here some passages. I'm going to read some of them. I'm just going to reference, but again, I'll have them in the video description there for your consideration if you're following along. But in Psalm 86 and verse 11, Psalm 86 and verse 11, we find these words, "Teach me your way, O Lord. I will walk in your truth. Unite my heart to fear your name." In the 119th Psalm, there are several references to teaching and to being taught. Psalm 119 and verse 12, verses 26 and 29, 33 and 64, 66 and 68, 108, 124, 135, and 171. All of those verses there speak in some way to seeking testimony, to being taught, or to teaching. And then, again, we find in the 143rd Psalm, Psalm 143 and verse 10, "Teach me to do your will, for you are my God. Your spirit is good. Lead me in the land of uprightness." Let's notice some key words there in that passage. Number one, teach and lead. Two key words there. That guidance is being requested from God. Secondly, our relationship with God depends on discipline as well. Just as a father will discipline and correct his children, so it is with God to correct us. Psalm 94 and verse 12. Psalm 94 and verse 12. And here's what we'll find. "Blessed is the man whom you instruct, O Lord, and teach out of your law." There's the instructive discipline. And then we have corrective discipline as well. God disciplines us correctively. Proverbs chapter 3 and verses 11 and 12. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 11 and 12. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor detest his correction. For whom the Lord loves, he corrects, just as a father the son in whom he delights. And that passage is repeated in the New Testament in the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, and verses 7 through 11. But also a good father provides nourishment to his children. Psalm 103 and verse 13. Psalm 103 and verse 13. And here's what you will find. As a father pities his children, so the Lord pities those who fear him. To kind of wrap this up, a father's relationship with his children, in a sense, is a manifestation of our relationship with God. They both involve authority. They both involve instruction, teaching, and correction. And they all involve nurturing. My friends, again, fathers are critical to the family unit and to the preservation of society. We need godly fathers more than ever. Let us take serious heed to these things. Try to the best of our ability to practice these things. And let's see how quickly things may start to change for the better in our culture. One final thing for your consideration here today is Luke chapter 15. There we have perhaps the greatest and most beautiful picture of all of this point of God's relationship. There you have a son who went astray, but yet you had a loving, merciful, and compassionate father who was ready and willing to receive him. My friends, it's a beautiful thing. So let us again think about these matters, and let us be the lights, let us be the examples that we have been called to be. Take care, and God bless.